Dust moved like ghosts along the main road of Larkspur Bend, curling around the hitching posts and drifting over the porch rails of shuttered storefronts. The afternoon light hung low and amber, the kind that made every speck of dirt shimmer like it had a right to be there. But not her, not Nora Vance. She came walking out of the horizon like something half-remembered and wholly unwanted. Barefoot, hair matted, a torn shawl clinging to her shoulders. Every step she took left a faint smear of red dust, as if the earth itself wanted to mark her passage. The townsfolk stopped what they were doing. A woman by the bakery drew her child close. A man leaning on a post muttered, "That one's from Silver Vein, sure as sin." Another spat in the dirt and said, "They don't wash the filth off those camps easily." Nora heard them all. She didn't flinch. Her eyes, gray as iron left out in the rain, kept searching not for kindness, just for somewhere to be. The Silver Vein mining camp had been more pit than town, a place where the men worked deep and the women worked deeper, cleaning, serving, surviving under the whip of cruelty. When the cave-in came, Nora didn't look back. She walked through ash and echo until her legs gave out. Now Larkspur Bend rose before her like the last stop before nowhere. Her throat burned. Her hands trembled as she tried to straighten her shawl, hiding the bruises underneath. She moved toward the well in the center of town, but a woman carrying a bucket stepped in front of her. "Don't," the woman hissed. "You'll foul the water." Nora stopped short. The eyes around her didn't blink, didn't move. Only the wind, restless and sharp, dared to touch her. That's when the sound came, a slow, measured clang of hammer on anvil. Clang, clang, clang. It came from the blacksmith shop at the end of the street. Inside, Caleb Rourke wiped his brow, the soot dark on his skin like war paint. He'd been a man of few words since the war took half his company and left him a limp that never healed right. The townsfolk called him steady, honest, and sometimes, behind his back, strange. He worked better with metal than people. But when he looked up and saw her, thin, trembling eyes like a trapped bird, something old in him stirred. He set the hammer down. Nora stood at the threshold, too weary to speak, too proud to beg. For a moment, all the sounds of town fell away, the gossip, the clatter, even the wind. Caleb took the bucket from the forge trough and walked toward her. "You look like you could use a drink." Her cracked lips parted, but no words came. She took the water, drank slowly, eyes darting like a deer, unsure if it's safe to breathe. Behind her, someone muttered, "Careful, Rourke. Dirt rubs off." Caleb didn't answer. He just nodded toward a bench by the wall. "Sit, rest a bit." She hesitated, then obeyed. The wood creaked beneath her and her body shook once before she stilled. "You from Silver Vein?" he asked quietly. Her gaze flicked up, startled. Most men asked like they were buying information. Caleb asked it like a man taking inventory of pain. "I was," she whispered. He nodded. "You made it out. That counts for something." Nora looked down at her hands, calloused, cut, shaking still. "It doesn't count for much out here." For the first time since she'd entered town, someone looked at her without disgust. Caleb poured another bucket of water into the trough and said, "Out here we make what counts." The clang of his hammer resumed, steady and sure, echoing through the street like a heartbeat that refused to die. As dusk fell, Nora stayed sitting on that bench watching sparks jump from the forge like tiny stars defying the dark. She didn't know if this was mercy or just delay, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. Behind her, the townsfolk whispered still, branding her with the same word that followed her across miles of dust, dirty. But by the forge fire, Caleb Rourke didn't hear it. And if he did, he didn't care. The morning light crept across the forge, thin and silvery, sliding over the anvil, the horseshoes, and the figure still curled on the bench. Nora woke with a start, clutching her shawl. For one wild second, she thought she was back in the mining camp, until she heard the steady rhythm of a bellows and smelled iron instead of coal dust. Caleb Rourke was already working. His hammer rose and fell with calm precision, sparks blooming at every strike. He didn't look at her when he spoke. Water's by the door. Bread's on the shelf. Her stomach twisted with hunger. She hesitated, unsure if it was a trick, but when he finally glanced her way, his expression was plain, unbothered. Just an offer. She ate quietly, chewing each bite as if afraid it might disappear. Outside, the town began to stir. Boots on planks. Wagons rolling. Voices carrying in the cold air. Nora finished her meal and stood. "I should be going," she said softly. Caleb quenched the glowing metal and water with a hiss. "Got somewhere to go?" She hesitated. The truth sat heavy on her tongue. "No," he nodded as if that settled something. "Then don't rush." But she couldn't just stay. She knew what people were saying already. From the open window drifted their murmurs. That woman's trouble. Came from the pit, they say. Rourke best not ruin his good name. She swallowed. The same sickness that lived in those whispers had chased her from every corner of the frontier. This time she wanted to stand tall against it. By mid-morning, she found the courage to ask the only question that mattered. "Is there work?" Caleb paused mid-swing. "Work? I'll sweep, mend, polish, anything," she said. "Don't need charity. Just a place to earn my keep." He studied her for a long moment. There was no pity in his gaze, just a quiet measure of worth. Finally, he nodded toward a broom near the door. "Start with that. Shop floor collects more dust than I care to admit." Her shoulders eased a fraction. "Yes, sir." The broom felt awkward in her hands, too light compared to the pickaxes and crates she'd carried before. But sweeping gave her purpose, and purpose gave her breath. She worked until her arms trembled, until the dirt that covered her was replaced by the kind she could brush away. By noon, the place looked nearly spotless. Caleb handed her a tin cup of coffee. "Payment," he said simply. She tried to smile. "Generous of you," he shrugged. "Just fair." That word, fair, hung between them like something sacred. As the day waned, a few townsfolk wandered by, watching her through the open doorway. Mrs. Haskin from the bakery, hat perched like judgment itself, leaned close to a man beside her. "Poor fool's gone soft," she muttered, eyes fixed on Caleb, bringing that filth into his shop. "Next thing you know, he'll lose his customers," Caleb kept hammering. Didn't even look up. When they were gone, Nora spoke quietly. "They'll turn on you." "They've done worse," he said. She frowned. "You don't even know me." "Don't have to." He wiped sweat from his brow. "You're human." "That's enough." Nora stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "At Silver Vein," she murmured, "they took everything. My name, my clothes, my right to choose. But not this." She lifted her chin. "Not my will to stand upright." For a long moment, the only sound was the hiss of cooling iron. Caleb nodded once, slow and sure. "Then stand. You'll do fine here." She turned away so he wouldn't see her tears. Through the open doorway, the sun slipped behind the ridge, setting the sky ablaze in molten red. Outside, the whispers spread like dry grass fire. Inside, two souls who'd both been branded by loss worked in quiet rhythm, the clang of metal joining the steady sweep of her broom. And though no one in town saw it yet, the first sparks of dignity were beginning to rise. By the end of that week, Nora's hands no longer trembled when she held a broom. She'd learned the rhythm of the forge, the breathing of the bellows, the whisper of cooling metal, the pause before the hammer fell. Caleb had shown her how to heat the iron until it glowed like the heart of the sun, how to strike true so it bent, not broke. "She's quick," he said once, to no one in particular. "Iron listens to steady hands." The compliment startled her more than any insult ever had. Each morning she arrived before the sun fully cleared the ridge, sweeping the ashes and setting the tools right. Each evening she left with soot on her face and the faintest glimmer of pride beneath it. Caleb had started letting her file small horseshoe nails, then polish the heads of finished pieces. "I never thought I'd touch something meant to build," she said one afternoon. "Everything I've done before was meant to scrape, to survive." Caleb's answer came between strikes of the hammer. Buildings just surviving with purpose. But peace never lasts long in places that feed on gossip. It began the day the riders came in from Silver Vein, 3 men with the look of wolves who'd learned to walk upright. Dust and arrogance clung to them as they dismounted outside the saloon. One of them, a narrow-eyed man named Ketter, spat in the dirt and said, "Heard a stray woman is working down by the smithy. Says she's Nora Vance." The barkeep nodded warily. "That's her name," Ketter grinned. Well, guess she crawled out of the pit after all." Within hours, whispers slithered through town faster than smoke. "Those Silver Vein boys say she was no victim," one man muttered outside the store. "Say she ran with them, took their pay, then turned on them." "Dirty," another agreed. Always was. By sundown, Nora could feel the change. Faces that once ignored her now sneered openly. When she went to the general store for flour, the owner said they were fresh out, though the shelves behind him said otherwise. She carried her empty hands back through town, the word dirty following her like a fly that wouldn't die. Caleb noticed the silence before she even spoke. "They're saying things," she said finally, "about Silver Vein, about me." He set the hammer down, eyes steady. "Let 'em." She looked at him, voice trembling. "You don't know what they're saying." "I know it's gossip," he said, wiping his hands. "And gossip's a kind of filth I don't let near my forge." But it wasn't that simple. That evening, as Caleb finished shoeing a horse, the sheriff stopped by. "Word's spreading," he said gruffly. "Might be wise to send the girl along. Trouble follows the Silver Vein kind." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Trouble follows cowards who believe lies." The sheriff sighed. "Just keep her out of sight, Rourke. Folks are getting nervous." When the door closed, Nora stood in the corner, pale and still. "He's right," she whispered. "If I stay, they'll come for me or for you." Caleb turned, voice calm but firm. "I've lived through worse fires than talk. Nora, you don't run from heat, you forge through it." That night, Nora lay awake on the cot in the back room, staring at the ceiling beams. Every whisper she'd heard all her life came back. Filthy girl, camp rat, not fit for decent company. Her fists clenched. Her breath came fast. But beneath the hurt, something else stirred, a stubborn flame. The next morning, she walked to the forge early and lifted a small hammer. Her grip was awkward, but she struck the cold iron anyway. Once, twice, again. Caleb came in, watching quietly. "That's not how you start," he said gently. "I know," she said, raising the hammer again. "But it's how I keep going." He smiled faintly. "Then let's make it right." Together they worked until sweat ran down their faces, until her arms burned. When she finally shaped a crude horseshoe, she laughed. A raw, uncertain sound that still felt like victory. Outside, the miners' lies darkened the town's heart. Inside the forge, Nora Vance struck her first piece of truth, but the storm was already gathering beyond the ridge. The morning air bit cold as Nora packed her few things, a comb, a torn shawl, a single silver button she'd once hidden from the overseer at Silver Vein. She placed them carefully in a small bundle, tying it with twine. The forge was quiet. The air smelled faintly of smoke and iron, the scent of something built from fire. She stood by the door a long moment before knocking on the wall to get Caleb's attention. He was oiling a pair of tongs, sleeves rolled up, forearms blackened from the forge. "You're up early," he said. "I'm leaving." The words came out steady, though her heart wasn't. Caleb looked up, slow and unreadable. "Why?" she swallowed. "You heard what they're saying. The miners won't stop, and the sheriff's already warned you. If I stay, you'll lose everything." He set the tongs down, wiped his hands on a rag. "I've already lost enough in this life. Not losing this too." Nora shook her head. "You don't understand. They called me dirty. They always will. Maybe they're right." Caleb took one step closer, the light from the forge flickering across his face. He reached into the trough, dipped his hands in the black water, and then held them out to her, dripping, stained with soot. "You see this?" he said quietly. "This is what keeps me alive. Dirt, ash, sweat, none of it means unclean. It means human." Her eyes glistened. "They called me dirty," she said, her voice breaking for the first time since she'd come to town. He met her gaze. Then they never knew clean. The silence that followed was heavier than any noise. The words lingered in the air like something hammered into place, hot, bright, unbreakable. Nora lowered her bundle. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was standing in someone else's town. She felt like she belonged to the ground beneath her feet. Days passed. The forge became a rhythm, a heartbeat. Caleb showed her how to temper metal in oil, how to shape it without cracking. She learned fast, her confidence growing like flame on dry wood. "You've got a craftsman's patience," he told her one afternoon. She smirked. "Or a prisoner's," he smiled. "Sometimes those are the same thing, until you choose to leave the cell." They worked side by side, their movements falling into sync. Sparks flew between hammer blows, tiny constellations of light that painted their faces gold. The town still whispered, but she didn't bend under it anymore. When she walked to the well, she met their stares with steady eyes. When they called her names, she didn't lower her head. She carried herself like a woman who'd found something that couldn't be taken. Caleb noticed. He didn't say much about it, but his eyes softened when she entered the forge each morning. There was something sacred in their unspoken understanding. No need for confessions or declarations. Just shared silence, honest work, and the faintest warmth beneath it all. One evening, as the sun died over the hills, a rumble of hooves echoed down the main road. The miners were back. Nora froze mid-strike. Caleb turned toward the sound, shoulders tightening. 3 figures dismounted, dust swirling around their boots. Ketter's voice cut through the air. "There she is. Thought you could hide behind a hammer, girl?" Caleb stepped forward, stance wide, face calm. "You're not welcome here." Ketter grinned, cruel and sure. "She's ours. Ran off with camp money. You think she's clean, blacksmith? You don't know what filth you're feeding." The words stung, but not like before. Nora felt anger, not shame, rise in her chest. Caleb didn't move. "You've said enough. Mount up and ride." The men laughed, but there was something in Caleb's stillness that unsettled them. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't need to. His presence alone was forged steel. After a long moment, Ketter spat in the dust. "This ain't over." When they rode off, Nora's knees weakened. Caleb caught her elbow. "You all right?" She nodded faintly. "I'm tired of running." He looked at her, the forge light glinting in his eyes. Then stop. For the first time, she believed she could. That night, as they worked in the dim glow of the coals, the air between them felt different. Less like fear, more like promise. The hammer rang steady and true, echoing through Larkspur Bend like a vow. They would not bow to filth or fear, not anymore. The air that night was strange, too still, too quiet. Even the crickets seemed to know something was coming. Caleb worked late at the forge, finishing a plow blade for the Johnson farm. Nora had stayed too, sweeping the back room and humming under her breath, a tune she barely remembered from her childhood. When the first stone hit the side of the shop, she thought it was an accident. The second one shattered the window. "Caleb," she gasped. He was already moving. He grabbed the poker from the forge, his body tensing as voices rose outside. "Come out, Rourke," someone shouted. "Time you handed over what don't belong to you." The miners. Nora's breath came fast. Through the crack in the door, she saw them. 5 of them this time, torches in hand, faces mean with drink and hate. The same wolves in human skin. The rest of the town watched from their porches, silent shadows pretending not to see. Caleb stepped out into the open, the heat from the forge painting his face red. "You boys looking for work or just trouble?" Ketter laughed, flame dancing in his eyes. "Trouble's cheaper." Nora gripped the doorframe. Her instinct screamed to hide, to make herself small, invisible, like she'd done in the camp when the men came at night. But Caleb's voice cut through the fear. "You're trespassing," he said. Ketter stepped closer. "We're here for what's ours. That woman you're keeping, she's a thief, a liar, and worse. We'll take her back." Caleb didn't move. "She's no one's property." "Then maybe she's yours," Ketter sneered. "How noble, blacksmith." Defending trash, Caleb raised the poker. "Say that again." The first blow came fast, a torch swung at his head. He blocked it, but the impact drove him to one knee. Nora screamed his name. Two miners lunged forward, grabbing her by the arms. Something inside her snapped, not from fear, but fury. She twisted, elbowing one in the ribs, then grabbed the nearest thing she could, her own hammer. Still warm from the forge, she swung. Once, twice. Sparks of rage meet sparks of steel. The man stumbled back, howling. "You little—" Before he could finish, Caleb was on his feet again, swinging the poker with the precision of a soldier who'd seen enough death to know where to aim. The fight was chaos, shouts, firelight, metal clashing. The smell of sweat and smoke and blood filled the night. When it was over, two miners lay groaning in the dirt. The others backed away, hatred dimming into fear. Ketter glared at Nora, clutching his split lip. "This ain't done," he spat. "We'll see what the sheriff says about you both." "Do that," Caleb growled. "And tell him who started it." The miners limped off into the darkness. Nora stood trembling, the hammer still in her hand. Her breath came in ragged bursts. Her dress was torn, her hair wild, her arms shaking, but her eyes burned bright. Caleb stepped closer. "You all right?" She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't hide this time." "No," he said softly. "You didn't." He took the hammer gently from her hands, setting it on the anvil. "You forged this yourself," he said. "Seems it knew who it belonged to." Minutes later, the sheriff arrived, lantern swinging. He looked over the damage, the broken glass, the bruised men being tended by their friends. "What in blazes happened here?" Caleb answered evenly. "They came to take her. We said no." The sheriff's gaze shifted to Nora, then back to the blacksmith. "You both might want to lay low for a while. Folks are spooked." "Folks watched while those men lit torches," Caleb said coldly. "If that's peace, Sheriff, you can keep it." The sheriff sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'll file a report. But you've stirred the pot, Rourke. Some in town are saying you're protecting Sin." Caleb looked toward Nora, standing tall despite her shaking. "Then they don't know what Sin looks like." When the sheriff rode off, the forge felt different, hotter, wilder. Nora stood beside the broken window, staring into the fire. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "You could have been killed." Caleb's reply came low, steady. "So could you." Their eyes met in the glow of the forge. Neither spoke after that. They didn't need to. Outside, the torches died. Inside, two fires stayed lit, the forge, and the fierce, quiet bond between them. And somewhere in the watching dark, Larkspur Bend held its breath. And by morning, the whole of Larkspur Bend knew. Every porch, every table at the cafe, every whispered circle by the well carried the same words. The blacksmith fought the miners. For her, some said she'd bewitched him. Some said he'd lost his mind. Others said the sheriff ought to run them both out before the town burned for their sins. When Nora stepped outside the forge to fetch water, shutters closed. Mothers pulled their children inside. She could feel the weight of every eye on her back, heavy, accusing, relentless. Caleb tried to pretend it didn't bother him, but the way he hammered told the truth. Each blow landed harder than the last, each strike a war against something he couldn't touch. Finally, the sheriff came. Hatlow jaw set. He looked tired, not cruel, just worn down by years of balancing justice on a knife's edge. "Rourke," he said, "you know the town's uneasy. The miners filed a claim. You assaulted them. Folks think the girl's the cause." Caleb wiped sweat from his brow. "You gonna arrest her for surviving?" The sheriff sighed.
"No, but I'll tell you plain.
"If she stays, there'll be blood. Maybe yours." Nora stepped forward. "Then I'll go." Caleb turned sharply. "No." "Listen to him," the sheriff said softly. Sometimes peace means knowing when to move on. Caleb's voice rose like thunder. Peace built on fear isn't peace, it's rot. He took a breath, forcing his temper down. Then, without warning, he grabbed the signboard that hung over his door, Rourke Ironworks, and smashed it against the ground. The wood splintered in two. "If she goes," he said, voice breaking through the silence. "I go." The sheriff stared, stunned. "You're a fool." Caleb met his gaze. "Maybe, but I'd rather be a fool with a clean heart than a coward with a quiet town." The sheriff left without another word. The sound of his horse's hooves faded down the road like a dying heartbeat. That night the forge stayed dark. Nora sat by the cold anvil, her hands folded in her lap. Caleb sat across from her, staring at the broken sign. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, she whispered, "You shouldn't have done that. I meant every word. You'll lose everything." He looked at her, really looked, as if seeing through all the dust and shame she carried. "Nora, everything I ever built came from loss. This forge, these hands, they only made sense when I stopped trying to please people who'd already made up their minds." Her throat tightened. "I don't want you ruined because of me. You didn't ruin me." He leaned forward. "You reminded me what decency is." The words hit her harder than any blow from Silver Vein ever had. She lowered her gaze. "When I was in that camp, the foreman used to say we were dirt, meant to be trampled. And the worst part? I believed him. Every time I looked in a mirror, I saw filth." She lifted her head, tears streaking through the soot on her cheeks. "You look at me like I'm worth something. I don't know how to live with that." Caleb's voice was barely above a whisper. "Start by believing it." The next morning, Caleb did something he hadn't done in years. He walked straight into the center of town. People stopped talking as he climbed the steps of the sheriff's porch. "I've got something to say," he called out. Half the town gathered. Even the miners stood at the edge, arms crossed, waiting for the show. Caleb's voice carried like the ring of a hammer. "You all talk about filth," he said. "About sin and shame and dirt. But you don't know what filth is. Filth is a man who watches suffering and does nothing. Filth is cowardice dressed as decency. Filth is turning your back on the broken because their pain makes you uncomfortable." He looked toward Nora, standing a few yards away, trembling but unbowed. "You call her dirty," he said, "because it's easier than seeing the dirt on your own hands." A murmur swept the crowd. Some lowered their eyes. Others scowled. "She's not the stain," Caleb finished, voice steady. "She's the soap." For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then he turned and walked back toward the forge, shoulders square, steps unhurried. And that evening they worked again, quietly, side by side. The town hadn't decided what to do yet, but the fire in the forge burned steadily as ever. When Nora raised her hammer to strike, Caleb said softly, "You hear that?" "What?" The sound of people thinking. "That's louder than hate," she smiled faintly. "For now," he nodded. "For now, enough." And the steady ring of the hammer filled the night again, defiant, patient, clean. 2 days passed. The air in Larkspur Bend hung thick with rumor and unease. The sheriff had sent a rider to confirm what the miners claimed, and what Caleb had shouted before the whole town. While they waited for word, no one came near the forge. But silence is its own kind of trial. Caleb kept working, though fewer orders came in. Nora helped him with repairs, mending, shaping, polishing. Each strike of the hammer seemed to defy the fear outside. Still, she couldn't shake the dread. Every time a hoofbeat echoed down the street, she froze, expecting it to be the end. Then one afternoon it was. The sheriff rode in hard from the west, dust thick on his coat. He dismounted in front of the blacksmiths and called out, "Rourke, Miss Vance." Caleb stepped outside, Nora close behind. The townsfolk, drawn by curiosity, began to gather, faces pale, eyes hungry for a verdict. The sheriff unfolded a crumpled report, the official seal still faintly visible in the sunlight. His voice carried clearly. Message came down from Silver Vein Outpost. The mining camp's been shut down by the territorial marshal. They got statements, sworn ones, from surviving workers. Says one woman helped expose the overseers, led the others to safety before she ran. He looked up, gaze steady. That woman was Nora Vance. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Lord above." The sheriff continued, voice rough but certain. She wasn't a thief or a harlot. She was a witness. A whistle against filth most of you couldn't stomach hearing about. The miners at the back shifted uneasily. Ketter's face went pale. "Lies," he muttered, but no one echoed him. Caleb crossed his arms. "You were saying, Ketter?" The man backed a step, jaw tight. His bravado drained like water from a cracked cup. The sheriff folded the paper. "Far as I'm concerned, Miss Vance is cleared. You folks owe her more than silence." He turned to leave, but Caleb's voice stopped him. "Not just silence," he said. "They owe her respect." No one spoke. The only sound was the steady crackle from the forge behind them. Nora stood frozen, her mind trying to catch up. The words felt unreal. Cleared. Witness. Respect. A woman in the crowd stepped forward, Mrs. Haskin, the baker who'd once barred her from the well. She removed her hat, eyes damp. "Miss Vance, I didn't know, Nora cut her off gently. "You didn't want to know." The older woman bowed her head. "Reckon that's true." Another man cleared his throat. "You showed more courage than any of us." Soon the murmurs shifted, not scorn this time, but shame. Faces that once looked away now met her eyes, uncertain but sincere. Nora felt her chest tighten, not from fear, but from something deeper. Release. For the first time, she wasn't running from her name. She stood in the center of Larkspur Bend, the sun warming her face, the word dirty finally losing its grip. Caleb looked at her, and there was quiet pride in his eyes. "Seems truth travels slow," he said, "but it gets there." She smiled faintly. "Sometimes you have to forge it first." He nodded toward the shop. "Then let's forge something worth keeping." Inside, he unrolled a new piece of parchment on the bench, a design he'd been sketching in secret. It was a signboard, Rourke and Vance Ironworks. She stared at it wide-eyed. "You want me to work with me," he said simply. "Equal hand, equal name, equal respect." Her throat caught. "You'd share your shop with me?" "I'm not sharing," he said. "I'm partnering." For a long heartbeat she couldn't speak. Then she laughed, a sound so pure and sudden it startled them both. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he replied, smiling for the first time in weeks. She wiped her eyes. "Yes." Evening settled over Larkspur Bend. The forge came alive again. Sparks rose like fireflies into the twilight. The rhythmic ring of two hammers echoed down the street, two souls shaping more than metal. Outside, townsfolk paused to listen. Some smiled. Others simply stood still, heads bowed as if in prayer. Inside, Nora struck her hammer against the anvil, the iron glowing red beneath her hands. She no longer trembled. Each blow sang with strength, purpose, and something close to peace. For the first time, the clang of steel didn't sound like a struggle. It sounded like freedom, and in that sound, the town heard something clean. Morning came slow and bright over Larkspur Bend. The first frost had touched the roofs, turning them silver white, and smoke curled gently from the chimneys as if the whole town exhaled. Inside the forge, the air was already alive, warm, rhythmic, steady. Nora Vance stood before the anvil, her hair bound back, her sleeves rolled high. Her face bore streaks of soot, but her eyes were clear, calm, The iron bar before her glowed orange in the dim light. Caleb stood across from her holding the tongs as she raised the hammer. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded. "Let's make it clean." The hammer fell, ringing through the air. Sharp, bright, final. That first strike seemed to echo through the whole town. Doors opened, heads turned. The sound carried down the street, through the saloon, past the general store, even to the old well where whispers once followed her name. Children paused their play. A few women smiled faintly. The sound wasn't harsh, it was alive, certain, honest. Nora struck again. And again. The piece they were shaping wasn't just another hinge or plow blade. It was something personal, deliberate, a small iron plate curved with care. When it cooled, Caleb set it on the bench and brushed the soot aside. Etched upon it in simple letters were two intertwined initials, R and V. Nora ran a thumb over them, her voice low. "That's us." Caleb smiled, weary but soft. "That's the mark we'll leave." Outside, the townsfolk began to gather again, not in fear this time, but in quiet curiosity. Mrs. Haskin brought bread from the bakery, setting it on their stoop. The sheriff tipped his hat as he passed. A few miners from the camp even muttered apologies they didn't quite know how to voice. Nora didn't need words. Their silence was enough. Caleb hung the new sign that afternoon, Rourke and Vance Ironworks. The old board, cracked and splintered from the night of the fire, lay behind the shop. He looked at it once more before tossing it into the forge. The wood caught quickly, curling in orange light, the old name burning away. "Feels right," he said. Nora watched the flames for a long while, then nodded. "You can't build clean on what's already burnt." He turned to her. "So we build new." "Together," she added. He smiled. "Always." That night, after the work was done and the town had gone quiet, Nora sat outside the forge on the wooden step, wrapped in Caleb's old coat. Above her, the stars burned sharp and cold. For the first time since she could remember, she wasn't afraid of stillness. She thought of Silver Vein, of the screams and shadows she left behind. Then she thought of this place. The hiss of the bellows, the ring of steel, Caleb's quiet steadiness beside her. Freedom didn't come from forgetting the dirt. It came from walking through it and standing tall anyway. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of a church bell from across town. It reminded her of something Caleb had said. Truth travels slow, but it gets there. She whispered into the night, then let it keep traveling. At dawn, the forge came alive again. Together they lit the coals, stoked the fire, and set to work. The sound of their hammers wove through the streets like a heartbeat, steady, defiant, alive. By midday, the sheriff stopped by to deliver one last letter, an official commendation from the marshal's office, acknowledging Nora's bravery. She read it, smiled, and tucked it into a drawer. "Don't need paper to tell me who I am," she said. Caleb chuckled. "Still, it's good kindling if we run out." She laughed, shaking her head. "You'd burn anything that reminds you of the past." "Only the things that deserve to be ashes," he said. They shared a quiet look, one of understanding too deep for words. Poisaken, as the day drew to a close, Caleb stepped outside and leaned against the post, wiping his brow. The sky was painted gold and crimson, the same color as the molten iron that had bound them. Behind him, Nora set the finished iron, plate on the counter, their initials gleaming softly in the light. She tapped it once with her hammer. The note rang pure and long. The townsfolk passing by stopped and listened, not out of curiosity but out of respect. For in that sound was everything they'd learned: the cost of dignity, the courage to stand, clean in a dirty world, and the strength of two souls who refused to bow. The forge crackled, the town breathed, and Nora Vance, once called Dirty, smiled into the fire. Because in the end, she knew what Caleb had meant that night. They called me dirty. Then they never knew clean. The hammer fell one last time, ringing across Larkspur Bend like a promise, clear, defiant, and free. If Nora's courage struck something true in you, hit that like button and share her story so more hearts can hear it. And if you want more tales of grit and redemption from the Wild West, make sure you subscribe. There's another ride coming soon.